Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is May the 15th, day 135. And your reading today is 1 Samuel 13. And I'll read a few verses of it. There's no way we can cover... Oh, I have 1 Samuel in my notes. I apologize. 2 Samuel. It is 2 Samuel. 13.
Just didn't want to get accused of putting the wrong podcast up. Not like that's ever happened.
Yeah, it does happen. We all make mistakes, all of us. 2 Samuel 13, and we can't cover everything. We're going to talk an overview of the story and just talk about a few parts, but I'll read the first few verses to lay out how the story is going to play out. It says, Now David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Amnon became so obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought he could never have her. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jonadab. He was the son of David's brother Shimeah. One day Jonadab said to Amnon, What's the trouble? Why should the son of the king look so dejected after mourning? So Amnon told him, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And so then he lays out a plan of how they're going to do it. There's so much to talk about here. This may be a long podcast, or I don't know. We'll see. But it says he was so obsessed with her that he became physically ill. He was sick, love sick maybe. I don't know. Does love or obsession make us sick? Can it affect us physically?
I think we have lots of emotions that cause physical reactions in our body beyond what's just in our mind.
Right.
So yes, I think it's possible.
Yeah.
It physically affects you.
All of that is connected. Our gut's connected to our mind, and there's science emerging in the last 10 years about how that all works. And so it definitely is connected. And if he's not eating because he's so in love, then that would definitely, he was hangry. He was just...
Yeah, I don't guess would be uncommon to marry your half-sister in the Bible. Now, it seems weird for us, but...
Well, so Abraham, was that his half-sister, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there is precedent, but after Abraham, there was some rules in that don't marry any sibling. So there would have been rules at this point. It wasn't completely unheard of, but at this point, there were rules that was not okay.
So,
I don't think he had marriage on his mind anyway.
No, well, yeah, you think he only had one thing on his mind.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
It wasn't love.
It wasn't love.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he says he has a crafty friend. One, what is crafty? Because if I said that out of the context of this story, it almost sounds like a compliment, right? Like you're crafty. Almost. I didn't say it was. It's just almost a compliment.
I think there's a Beastie Boys song about that.
Oh, yeah?
I think so.
Would you like to...
They're talking about a girl who's crafty, and I'm not thinking that, I don't know. It may not have been a compliment.
But it's his cousin, but it describes him as a crafty friend who's going to devise a plan for him. He would have been better off without this friend.
Right.
So how do our friends take, I don't know, what we have? Let me address it this way. It appears that at least he's refused his urge to rape her, which is he's going to do,
right,
to this point. But you insert another friend into the situation. It's kind of like, I see this most with boys, mostly because we had mostly boys around the house, and we have 3 grandsons, and I'm a guy. I see it mostly with guys. They may have something on their mind, but they've thought, I can't do that. But you add one more boy to the situation, and all of a sudden they can devise the most ridiculously stupid plan that has ever come up with.
I think that happens with girls too. Like when you're at a slumber party, you call the boy that you that you prank call, you do all that stuff that you wouldn't do when you were alone. And in the context of a shrewd friend, being shrewd was I think it was a compliment in general, because we see Ehud, being shrewd with with hiding the sword to kill the king, and like all of that is a very good thing. So it kind of takes that, and it's like this crafty friend, but it's going to be a very bad thing that he's crafty.
Sure.
I feel like the difference is that if he was a good friend, he would not have said, well, let me help you figure out how to make this happen. He would have said, no, this is a bad idea. You need to leave him. You need to leave her alone.
Yeah, well, I am currently watching a special series on Netflix, The Anatomy of a Scandal. I was trying to remember what the name of it was. But it's about this man who's charged with rape, and I'm not to the end, so I don't know how it ends. But it's amazing the things that we can convince ourselves are acceptable, and that this is okay, and we hear one thing and they feel a completely different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this kind of goes along with this, but like continually telling boys, oh, you're visual creatures, it's you're going to lust after that woman, but and telling women they need to cover up to make sure that the men don't lust. That is putting continually into their head that, oh, this is something I can't control. This is something that's normal. It's normal to lust after women and all of that. And I think we've done a disservice to boys to continually feed that into their head.
Mm-hmm.
So I take the opposite view of that, is that if you don't make somebody aware that this is a problem, how are they going to deal with it? So if let's say somebody born into a family of alcoholics, and it's clear, science has told us that genetically you're more predisposed to be an alcoholic than homosexuality. That science tells us that you can be predisposed to be a homosexual, but there's more science about being an alcoholic. So if we don't tell them, okay, you're predisposed to be an alcoholic, you need to avoid alcohol with all reason possible because it's a very dangerous thing to you, we're doing them a disservice. That's my view of it. So I mean, I think there's two sides to it.
And you don't think just teaching them to respect women would kind of help solve some of those problems?
No, I don't think it. I don't think the answer to that is not a simple yes. That's what I would tell you, because if you're not aware of your triggers, you would have different triggers than I have. If you're not aware of your triggers, it doesn't matter how much respect, because he's doing pretty good on his own. But you bring another friend in there, it flips that trigger, and he does something stupid. I think you have to be aware of your triggers, and the only way to be aware of them is, one, to talk about them, two, to acknowledge them. And I think there are some I think men have different triggers than women do, and just that pretending like they're not present is if I teach somebody to respect a woman, but then they have this I'm sick and I don't understand why problem, and you say, well, you just got to respect people, and you don't explain to them the physical manifestations, because Sheryl alluded to it a while ago. Is he was after one thing. He was having a physical reaction to if you don't say, hey, this is what happens, you have this response. Respect doesn't solve that problem. So I personally think sticking your head in the sand and pretending like these things aren't present and not talking about them is just as bad.
I think the issue that's bigger than either one of these is the fact that he has seen how his dad's handled all this. I mean, look at how he ended up with his mom.
Right.
It probably does feel permissible to him at this point. So he has seen this pattern put out before him. Well, why not?
Yeah, and I think when we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, I think that some of this is a result of David's sin. God tells him, this is going to plague you forever. And I do think it plays out. And I don't, to the previous portion of the conversation, I don't just think it's as simple as one thing or the other. That's what I would say. I don't think you can say, if you do A, everything else is solved.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is a 30-minute podcast. We're not going to solve
Right.
the problem of lust.
Yes. we could try. But verses 12 and 13, he carries out this plan. So basically, she makes him dinner or breakfast, something, food, and she brings it in. And he asks her to bring it in the bedroom as she's feeding him, which is weird by itself. Apparently he's either really sick or playing really sick. He grabbed her and demanded that she come to bed with him. And she says, "No, my brother, don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. Such wicked things aren't done in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please just speak to the king about it and he will let you marry me." So she acknowledges here that if he just asked, he could marry her. And you mentioned he only had one thing on his mind. Clearly it's not marriage. He wants, to be.
And she probably doesn't want to marry him. She just doesn't want to be disgraced.
Right. But she's trying to reason with him. His obsession, though, overwhelms him. Now, let's go back to the point you were making a while ago. I have never understood the concept of rape. Like, anytime I hear about it, see it, like, it's hard for me to fathom how you force somebody to do something. Like, I can't comprehend that. But clearly something takes over that let me back up. I do know what it's like for all reason to go out the window and just to do whatever I want to do, So how does obsession, if that's the right word, cause us to lose reason or not listen to reason?
I mean, I think it's true for all of us if we make that decision just like he has, that he's going to make a really stupid decision in the moment as opposed to thinking about the future and look at, what happens eventually as a result of him giving in to his obsession over something momentarily. He obviously did not love her at all, or he wouldn't have done that to her.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. He says he loved her, but...
Right. Yeah. It just... Yeah, I think what's interesting here is there's a lot of times where we see what is maybe described as a rape in the Bible and other places where the woman doesn't have any agency. But we see here that she protests. And there's times when maybe it's like, well, maybe she was kind of willing. This is like she protests and we have documentation or this is the story that was passed on, that there was definite, like, I do not want to do this. This guy who was going to be king, he was the oldest son. He was...
Yeah, I've heard David and Bathsheba's situation described as rape. The Bible doesn't give us that's what it was. But this clearly does. This clearly says, hey, she says no, this is a stupid idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to ask what I want to ask. So I'm going to talk, and if we have to edit it out, we'll have to edit it out. I got to clear my head of the thoughts I'm thinking. So we don't typically, I can't think of a time I ever heard of a situation where a woman raped a man. There have been charges, for underage, those kind of things. But typically, forcibly, that's not the story. That's not typically the headline. So I have zero experience on the other side. Do you believe that I don't know what this is not going to come out right. Do you believe that male sexual dominance or male sexual freedom impedes on you as women? Like, do you feel threatened by men?
Have I ever been in a situation where I was like, oh, wow, this might go very bad? Is that what you're asking?
Okay, yeah, that would be fair.
yeah, there's been times when it's like, this is a situation I need to get out of. I don't know. And I mean,
Yeah, and in those situations, you realize somebody could physically dominate you.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, the man typically is going to be stronger. You know, if he chooses to hurt you, he many times he could, not always, but many times he could. Do you think that's common? And does it go away with age? Does it go away as people get older? Do you believe that still that this is acceptable? Do you think David turned his head because he had participated in the same kind of things? Because we're going to talk about that in just a minute.
I think it's probably more common than you think with conversations I've had with people where you find out things that have happened in their life and you're like, wow, that was really tough to go through. And us as women have probably had more conversations with women who have opened up to that than you. And it's surprising that, like, it is very common for women to have been sexually assaulted.
Mm-hmm. And surprising situations too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, things you wouldn't.
Things
Not
or
typical,
people or
not
situations.
here.
Yeah.
Like women who are friends with the man, and he just turns on her and sees the right opportunity.
Right.
I've had a couple of friends that's happened to. It's really, really painful for them.
This could be as we're recording this, actually. So we recorded earlier. As we're recording this, I think April is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, if I'm not mistaken. And the only reason I know that is on the way here, I passed by the courthouse and they had a sign in the front yard. But, it has come to the forefront in the last couple of, 2, 3, 4 years. It seems like COVID has made everything feel longer than it probably has. But I would guess 3 or 4 years, because it had to be pre-COVID when some of the things started coming out in Hollywood. And just in conversations I've had, I don't think we realize how prevalent it is. Mm-hmm. At least we don't talk about it publicly. That's what I would say. I think we may realize it. I'm not ignorant of it because of situations I end up being privy to. But I think it is something that we have to be aware of. And I don't know what you used the word respect earlier. I don't know how you deal with it completely. I don't know the best method, because I would have, because this is going somewhere I didn't have in my notes. But anyway, it's I remember going skating with a girl for the very first time. So I would have been 12 or 13 years old. And I specifically remember my mom showing me, like, if you put your arm around her, this is how you do it. You don't do it like this. Like, and that seems so simple, but clearly there's a point of no return where either physically, mentally, emotionally, something else takes over, and there's no reason. Like, nobody can talk you out of it. So anyway, I don't know if y'all have anything else you want to add to that. So verse 21 says, when David heard what happened, he was very angry. And though Absalom had never spoke about this to Amnon about this, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. So David's angry, but he does nothing. He doesn't mourn his daughter. He doesn't punish Amnon. And you know my theory about this. Like, I think he has a real weakness, because he's going to have the same problem with Absalom. He's just not going to be able to deal with him. Why do you think David did nothing?
I think there's probably, we know a lot about King David. We know more about King David than any other Old Testament person, and we don't really have an answer. But one, he did something very similar. We've talked about that already. And it's like, I didn't realize how quick these actions happened. Like, I mean, you know the stories, and then when you're reading them all together, it's like chapter 11, Bathsheba, chapter 12, rebuke, chapter 13, is what we're on today. And so I think maybe the grace, maybe the trying to show grace, the hope that it wouldn't get out because this was going to be the next king, I think, at this point. And he just maybe didn't know what to do. I mean, he didn't want to have to kill his own son.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
that's difficult. I mean, taking action against your children is difficult.
Yeah. And if she had been married, Amnon would have been killed because then it would have been different. But he could have said, okay, this isn't right, but you raped her. Now you're going to marry her. Because that was the typical thing. If you raped a virgin, you were married to her. Right. And so he could have taken other actions. He didn't necessarily have to.
He took no action.
He took no action. Yeah. And that comes back in very bad ways.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've talked too much.
Yeah, I mean, it's all speculation. But I would assume he was probably just hoping this is going to go away.
Right.
Yeah, so you mentioned when his failure to act creates a whole nother scenario that's going to create problems for him for years. Because, between stories, so between verse 22 and 23, it says 2 years later. So Absalom has been, he's almost like the Taliban. He's been planning for a long time, to figure this out. He's been patient, so he plans, he wants this dinner to happen, invite him to the dinner, and when he gets drunk, kill him. And I'm the one giving the command. How does this piece play out to the judgment that Nathan told David he was going to experience because of Bathsheba? There are a couple of things that were going to happen. There was going to be conflict in his family. So this is clearly conflict. The whole entire story is going to be conflict in his family. Somebody's going to challenge him for king and sleep with his concubines in public, which comes later. That's do you believe that the conflict between Absalom killing Amnon is a part of David's punishment from Bathsheba?
I mean, it fits the bill.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely connections to our actions, and that's a topic we've talked about many times when we've seen these family conflicts and things that parents and grandparents did happens with children and grandchildren. And so I think that, if David wouldn't have acted that way, this story probably wouldn't have happened this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've struggled with David for weeks as we've read through his story, it's hard to read and think of this innocent person who does the things that he does. Like he really has a string. I mean, when they come to tell him Saul is dead, he's like killing messengers, just thrusting his spear through them. He's just a real aggressive person, except with his children or his family. He's not aggressive with Saul. He's not aggressive with Amnon. He's not going to be aggressive with Absalom. And it's going to cause him problems, real problems. And I think his failure to deal with Amnon puts Absalom in a place he has to deal with it. And what I would say about that is when we abdicate our responsibility to deal with something, we put somebody else in a position that they have to deal with something that maybe they're not prepared to deal with. Verse 37, it says, and David mourned many days for his son Amnon. And Absalom fled, but he mourned many days. So he gets mad about Tamar, but he doesn't do anything. But he mourns for many days. For Amnon, a long time. Does it say anything about David that he mourns for one and not the other?
Well, Tamar doesn't die, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. But, I mean, the truth is, his sons were more important to him than his daughters were. Was typical then, and everybody's thinking of it, especially for a king.
Right.
And obviously, if he was fine with his daughter just going and living with her brother in shame, then it really wasn't that important to him. She wasn't.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, so this is one of those places where I've wrestled with David. Like, you know, this is one of those things. I love the character of David. I love the person of David. There are things that I appreciate about David, and clearly, I think his heart is his salvation. You know, his submissive heart in places, and his ability to love, but he causes him problems over and over again. But verse 39 says, and King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. So Absalom has left, gone to his grandfather's house, excuse me, and he stayed there for 3 years. When I preached on David and Saul, David had a real desire to be reconciled with Saul. He wanted Saul to like him. Let me back in the house, you know, let me be here. David has a real desire to reconcile, but it affects him. It affects his ability to think. It affects pretty much his whole life. When relationships are severed and we desire reconciliation, how does that affect us? Physically, mentally, emotionally?
I think it's painful for that tear to happen. That, I don't know, there's... Right now in our life group, we're doing a thing about reconciliation, and the thing that Andy Stanley says about it is you have to just do everything you can. And that's all you can do, you know? I mean, you can't control the other person, and that's the hard part, is you can do what you can, and you have to trust God, and I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you're only in control of what you can do in that situation, and I think if you do everything that's in your power to do, then you have to at some point be at peace about it.
Yeah, that's reconciliation can consume your mind. Mm-hmm. You know, you talked about a tear, and that's exactly what it is. It's not like, you know, it's not like you take a scalpel and divide two people. It's usually a ripping, and even when it heals, there's scars. You know, there's scar tissue, which creates pain forever, you know. And I think that when we're going through it, when we have that open wound, it consumes everything we do. It consumes our thoughts, you know. I know even when I feel like I have conflict with, conflict's not the right word. Situations that need to be reconciled, because all conflict can't be reconciled, but situations that need to be reconciled. No matter how minimal it is, how it weighs on my mind, how I think about it, you know, when I'm going to sleep, when I wake up, often it's the first thing on my mind, you know, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to deal with this? And in the situation of a child who just leaves and they don't speak for years, you know, and later is going to come back and, you know, try to take over the kingdom, it had to be painful. So.
Yeah, there was no Facebook stalking back then. You couldn't keep up on his
That's
sons,
right. You could,
like without direct communication.
Yeah,
right. I mean, I'm sure there was messages, reports, but
yeah, just heartbroken.
Yeah.
Good. All right, let's go to prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage today. Thank you for the challenge that it presents to us in our hearts and in our minds. I pray that you grant us grace to understand one another better. I pray that you would grant us wisdom in how to deal with relationships. I pray, God, that we would seek to be reconciled in every opportunity that we can, to do what we can do, and to lean into you for the healing that we need. In Jesus' name.